Right. It's a you shouldn't lie about any of these things. What I'm trying to do is create a situation where you can create a connection with these people, and bracketing off the legal and moral questions is really honest anyways. Because the truth is, a lot of Christians, when they talk on political and legal issues, act like truth is like toilet paper, and they have a supply in the closet. And the truth is, none of us really knows the right answer to these things, because there's a lot of factors that are way beyond our ability to fully comprehend. All we have is what we believe. And none of this stuff is central to Christianity. So it's not worth... The abortion thing, I think, is more arguably central. But that's the same thing. Death penalty. Same thing. I would bracket off the legal and moral question. But I would also say that I would mention that this is a much harder issue, that this is a particularly hard issue for Christians. And that Christians can hold a number of different positions. And that something I would mention about the death penalty is that anybody who's morally comfortable when talking about either side of this issue is the one who's really in the wrong. If I sit there and say, oh yeah, he killed someone, so you kill him, and that's just the right thing to do, and I don't have ambiguity about that, I'm wrong. If somebody says, no matter what a person does, they don't deserve to die, I don't care if they raped and killed a child, they still shouldn't, if you feel comfortable in that place, what you do with something like the death penalty, and this is to some degree true of gun control and abortion too, on all these issues I would say, I don't have the mind of God in a jar on my desk. These are really complicated human issues. I do the best I can with the Bible and with my reason, and I throw myself on the mercy of God. And I would say that about any of those political beliefs. The first thing I know when I think about abortion or the death penalty is that I'm a sinner. And that nothing anybody else has done is any worse than anything I've done. And that being a sinner, I don't have the ability just to morally analyze the situation. Because if you took the New Testament versus the Old Testament, you're going to have a real hard time justifying the death penalty. If all you had was the New Testament with Jesus, you'd have a real hard time using only the New Testament to justify the death penalty at all. That's the truth. If you have the Old Testament, much easier. But Christians ignore a lot of the Old Testament just because it's the Old Testament. There's a lot of the Old Testament Christians don't pay attention to because it's the Old Testament. And for good reason. Because the idea is that Jesus came and subrogated some of the law and stuff like this. I'll tell you about the death penalty for me personally. I waver. There's days I wake up and I'm against the death penalty. There's days I wake up and I'm like, I believe in the death penalty. Here's something I do believe, and this is a legal argument, not a moral argument. I think the death penalty needs a higher level of evidence than other cases. I think that to get the death penalty, you have to prove not beyond a reasonable doubt, but to near certainty. That's one thing I believe. I think that we should as a society be able to come to agreement on that. If there's significant questions left over, then you shouldn't be able to because it's the end. It's final. If you're talking about the Tsarnaev brothers, the guy who killed all the people in Fort Hood, you could still argue that they shouldn't be subject to the death penalty. But those would be cases in which I would say, okay, the two guys who killed that family in Vermont, where both of them admitted that they did it, and there was no questions about it. We have near certainty. Then I think that's something I personally believe. And each of you can put your own personal beliefs on that. You should state what you truly believe, and I would look for biblical reasons why you believe it. You know, it's easy, quote Jesus, turn the other cheek. That's an easy one. In the Old Testament, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. You know, the Bible has strict rules about murder and under what circumstances a person can be killed for a crime and stuff like that. So you should be able to talk about those things biblically. I would still bracket off the moral and legal questions. I would separate those two things. I would tell my own belief, and I would also say the same thing. That I try to make the best decisions I can on these issues, and I throw myself on the mercy of God. And the real person who's in a real dangerous place spiritually, I think, is the person who doesn't do that. I'm right, I know I'm right, and God's just going to say everything I did was right. This is one that we spent 2 months talking about. Why do you believe what you do? That's all we did in November and December. Mm-hmm. Why do you believe what you do? That's a chance to do your testimony. It's a chance to talk about apologetics, about personal experience. Why do you believe what you do? So I would really, that's the one you need to have down. That's the most important question you'll get asked, and you need to have an answer for. If I don't believe in God, does he still protect me? Yes. And here's what the point about that is. Creation is also a grace. Existence is a grace. The grace of God extends to everything that exists. To exist, you exist at the grace of God. So by anything that exists has God's grace and protection, or it would cease to exist. Not just die, but have never been. It would fade from being. So, that's an easy one. The answer to that question is yes. God protects. God doesn't extend protection in this world based on anything. There's no rhyme or reason to it. People get protected, people don't get protected. Good things happen, bad things happen. All good things flow to God. They do not flow evenly. That's the first question. Why is there evil in the world? But what is true is that everything is protected. And I would use, if you go into the details, I would use the example of creation is a grace. You exist at the grace of God. Creation is a free gift from God. So if you exist, you're protected by God. Does that make sense? Any comments on that?
It reminds me of the Battlestar Galactica Bible study where the question of does humanity have the right to survive?
Right.
You argued no, but it's only by the grace of God that we do because of his saving grace and his mercy and love towards us.
That's exactly right. Humanity does not have the right to survive. People do not have the right to exist. They exist as a gift from God. They have a right to exist relative to one another because nobody has a right to put themselves in the place of God. Hello? I didn't want Cheerios, I wanted Honey Nut Chex. Chex? C-H-E-X? It's cereal. Cereal. It's cereal, not Cheerios. Yeah, there you go.
That'll be on the video.
Yeah, I want Yes, Honey Nut Chex. Okay, I love you, my wife. So, do you agree with that? That God protects those who don't believe in Him? Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that's.
I think that was probably the easiest one.
Yeah, that's easy.
I think just because God is all love, so He protects those who don't believe in Him. It's just common sense, at least from our standpoint, it is.
Right.
So.
Clearly explain how to become a Christian. Becoming a Christian that was also something we covered the first time. Mm-hmm. What is being a Christian? And this is when you talk about. We're going to talk more about this in a second. Every day you get up and you form a relationship with Jesus Christ. Every day you become that's something that you're always doing. Life is not, it's just part of, it's getting up. It's believing in Jesus Christ. But I would bracket off the believing thing. It's having a relationship with Jesus Christ. You love Him. How do you have a relationship with other people? Talk to them. You listen to them. You try to learn about them. You ask them for things. They ask you for things. That's what a relationship with other people. Do that with Jesus Christ. Boom. That's what it means to be a Christian. I mean, does that sound?
Well,
and I think that's even if a guy in Iran who just found a New Testament and never got baptized, like never went under the water and never attended a single church, but every day he was talking to Jesus and trying to understand Jesus through the Gospels and listening to the voice that he thought was Jesus, and that person would be a Christian, right? Mm-hmm. We wouldn't have any restrictions on that person. We would say, yes, that person is an odd Christian because they're kind of alone, but still a Christian, right?
So it reminds me, the way I have my relationships with my friends is I contact them every once in a while. I'm not someone who can do a follow-up and keep in contact with people. And it's the same way with Jesus. With Jesus and God. I do not constantly pray, even though I should. I usually pray at night. Lately,
I would put that stuff aside. I wouldn't volunteer that information.
Yeah. I would not tell them that, but I just makes me think on a personal level.
Right.
The way I do my relationships with people who are long distance away from me is the same way I treat my relationship with God.
Well, I would encourage you on a personal level, and you probably already know I would encourage you to try to make your relationship with God more personal, especially as we lead up to this trip, to make that something that happens every day.
Yeah. Well, it's funny
because you're going to need it.
Yeah. Well, those are our personal relationships, but I rarely stay in contact with them, which is a very strange way to approach any kind of relationship. That's personal and close.
And you and I have a close relationship. I mean, but your relationship, I am closer to no one in this world than I am to Jesus Christ.
Right.
That's the truth. That's not bragging. It really isn't. It doesn't make me a great person. I do it because I'm weak, I'm stupid, and I need it. It doesn't make me a better person. There's plenty of people who, if you don't need it that way, that's whatever you are, that's you. Me, I can honestly say that my most important, the person I talk to the most, the person that I'm spending the most time with is Jesus Christ. And I commend that to everybody else. And I'm going on this trip to commend this to these young people. Mm-hmm. So, but your point is well taken. If you are Christian, are you a Christian? If you are christened, are you a Christian? In other words, is baptism? We did spend a whole day talking about this, right? Mm-hmm. Is baptism enough to make you a Christian? Y'all, I would really encourage y'all to use. I think the analogy I use is really, really good. I think you don't have to, but I would commend it to you. If someone gives you a car, it doesn't make you a driver. Baptism is a big deal. You got a car. That's awesome. I'd be happy if someone gave me a car, but it doesn't make me a driver. Being a driver is having a car, knowing how to drive it, and actually driving it. To be a Christian, you have to, yes, be baptized, to understand what that baptism means, and live your baptism every day. And for us, that's the baptismal covenant. And I would encourage you, for y'all to, it's less important for you, but for y'all to in Kendall, that you could do, is to look at the baptismal covenant in your prayer book that you got when you got confirmed. Look at the baptismal covenant and say, this is, living this every day is what it means to be a Christian. When I got baptized, I got given this. When I got confirmed, I said yes to this. And now I live this every day. Right? So did that work with everybody? I think that give me a car, like getting baptized. Doesn't make me a driver. To be a driver, I have to have a car. You can know how to drive and be able to drive, but if you don't have a car, you're not a driver. You have to have a car that you regularly have access to. So you have to have a car, you have to be able to know how to drive, and you have to drive it. To be baptized is to get the car. You have to know how to drive it, and you have to drive the car.
Baptism got like a whole new meaning to me when I watched The Godfather last night.
Oh,
you saw The Godfather for the first time?
Yup.
I want to watch it.
It was intense.
That is crazy. That's crazy.
That scene is intense.
It's intense.
Oh, I know what he's talking about.
Kidding me?
I've never seen the film, but my mom told me about the baptism scene.
It is, in my opinion, the scariest movie of all time. It's one of the scariest movies of all time.
Because
it's not the scariest, but it's one of the scariest.
It's more like an emotional, psychological level because of the way they treat each other.
Yeah, well, the scariest part about it is it's all true.
It's real life, yeah.
That's what's scary about it, is those people are monsters, and they're real monsters. They're monsters that it's all the stuff I talk about. Satan incarnating and power and people. That's what that is.
They're monsters who love and hate at the same time.
That is a crazy.
I'm guessing they love and hate because I'm assuming like the big deal with gangster movies like that is love or loyalty to the family is a big part of it.
You can answer this your own way. If I don't believe in God, will I go to hell? My response to that's going to be, whoever goes to heaven and hell is above my pay grade. That's in God's hands, not in my hands. That's not my decision. What I know is that because I have Jesus Christ in my heart, I'm going to heaven. I know that. Christ gives me it's like justification. Justification is an epistemological idea. It's an idea of, do you have the reason to believe? I have reason to believe I'm going to heaven because I have a relationship with Jesus Christ. That gives me a confidence in my destiny. That's what belief in Jesus Christ gives me. It gives me assurance that I'm going to heaven. I can trust that I'm going to heaven. If you do not have Jesus Christ, I do not believe you have that. But as for who actually is going, beyond those of us who have that, that's just not, that's God's business, not my business. I told Jared once, and I still think it's a strong argument. People are morons. We barely know how to put our shoes on in the morning. Do you think God put something as important as your salvation in your hands? No. God doesn't give people the right or the power to know who is or isn't going to heaven. Except for my own assurance, which comes from my faith in Jesus Christ. That's the only people I can... So Jared, I believe, believes in Jesus Christ. I have every reason to believe in. But I don't know Jared's heart. I can't see in his mind. Jared, you can't. There are people who make no distinction. They look and act exactly like you, but they don't really believe. And so I don't know that they have assurance that I have in my heart. I have the assurance of heaven. As for who goes to heaven and hell, besides me, that's above my pay grade. I don't get paid enough to make those decisions.
But we don't have the right to tell people that, oh, yeah, you're going to go to hell because, one of the excommunicated people back in the day.
Or you're the Westboro Baptist.
Right.
No, or you're the Westboro Baptist Church. You're crazy.
Perfectly said. Perfectly said. I would not tell people they are going one way or the other, either way. And I would say that's not my job, that's not what I'm here for. And guess what? I don't know. But what I know is that I have confidence in my heavenly destiny because I know that Christ died, that Christ suffered, because I know Christ is what God is. Then I have my own confidence of that. And I'm offering you to have the same thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I just remember we talked about one time, saving, God gives you the opportunities for grace by saving your physical life. In the end, it's in His hands, your grace, but you have to make an active part in it.
Right. Yeah.
To get it, because He's dangling it in front of you, and you're not, and it's there for you, but it's not guaranteed if you don't make an active step towards it.
Hopefully those give you all these things are meant to give you some tools, and I hope they do give you some tools on how to talk to people about these things in a way that invites them into faith. That's the goal. To invite people into relationship with Jesus Christ so they can live a fully lived human life. That's the purpose we talked about. That's what none of these answers are meant to be evasive. They're all true. Everything I'm saying is true. Y'all know that in my heart of hearts, I don't believe people go to hell. But the truth is, I don't know any of that. The only thing I know is about my own salvation and my dollars. Anyways, if God and Jesus are the same person, why do you have to go through Jesus to get to heaven? This is about having a personal relationship with God, and Jesus shows us who God really is. God can still relate to you, and you can have an indirect relationship with God because God relates to everything that exists. You exist with the grace of God, and therefore you're connected to God. You can't avoid some relationship with God. But your goal is not just to know about God. Your goal is to know God. Your goal is to have... And there's a difference between knowing about something and knowing it. The way I can know everything about you but not know you. You want to know God. Jesus Christ is what God is. If I want to see God, if I want to know God, and therefore if I want to have a relationship with God, I have to have a relationship with Jesus Christ, because Jesus Christ is what my image of God has to be able to have a proper understanding of God, to be able to relate to God at all. Additionally, Jesus came into this earth to die to free us from Satan's power. Be nice to recognize it. That's the other thing. The first thing to say is it's always the right thing to do to believe the truth. You don't want to not believe something that's true. And I believe Jesus really did die for us. And Jesus really did end the power of Satan on earth. And so, it's nice to believe that. But additionally, if you want to relate to God, if you want to experience God, you have to relate to God because Jesus reveals God. Jesus reveals what God is. What people knew about indirectly, Jesus lets us know directly. Does that help? Yes, God is still God no matter whether you relate to Him or not. But if you want to have that fully lived human life, you want a relationship with God. And that means understanding who God is. Not what God is, but who God is. And Jesus is who God is.
It makes sense, because how are you supposed to have a relationship with someone if you don't know who they are? Like you said, you can know about them, but you don't know them. Like, I could say I know everything about Dave Grohl, but I don't know who he is. I just know everything about him.
Right.
So.
It's the same thing.
Yeah.
The Big Bang. That's the next question. I'm yes, the Big Bang is real.
Yeah.
The only problem the Big Bang causes, this is just something else, this is an important thing. The only thing modern science causes you with, the only problems in the Bible, are the first 11 chapters of one book of the Bible. That's all. There's 11 chapters in one book that become problematic because of modern science. But when you look at it, a lot of that book is people interpreting their own experience of God through the science of the time. So keep everything the same, just change the science of the time. Boom, Big Bang's no problem. Now there's some people who say if you don't believe in absolutely every single word of the Bible is literally in a newspaper report the way it happens, then you can't take the Bible as a whole. I don't believe that way. I'm an Anglican, and that's just going to be something that's different between us. I'm really a Pentecostal, but that's something that's different between us and the other people that are going.
Yeah. Who else is going? We'll get
And that's Sunday Baptist Church. And, you know, Nate Jordan said when he stays with a priest, an Anglican priest over there. And the Anglican priest first asked him, you really don't believe in dinosaurs? And, you know, you really don't believe that, you believe the universe was only 5,000 years old? And Nate Jordan believes that. And, of course, the Anglican priest didn't. So these people are going to be going to churches. We're inviting them to go to churches that don't believe that anyways. So I don't know that that's a big problem. Maybe the evangelicals there will have a problem with it, but the truth is, there's just no way to get around it. If a kid asks you if you believe in the Big Bang, asks me, maybe you don't, I don't know what you believe.
Oh,
I don't know. If somebody asks me about dinosaurs and the Big Bang, I'll be like, yes, there were dinosaurs, and yes, there were Big Bang, and that's how God made the world.
Big Bang's cooler. I think that's my criteria.
Big Bang is God.
Well, here's the deal about the Big Bang theory, is that the same thing goes back to the earlier question. Why do bad things happen to good people? Why does it take God 15 billion years to get to people? If God wanted people, why does it take 15 billion years to get there? Because God gives the universe freedom. Freedom means meandering. Freedom means going your own way. God did not force the universe to produce what he wanted it to produce all at once.
They kind of compress it into forcing creation to be like the way he would. Like maybe he let the whole universe like play out in it and decided, I want to see what you produce.
Right.
And I have come to love humanity, which you have produced.
Right. And the creation through Christ is another way to say it. For me, the Big Bang Theory, the Logos, John 1 says that God created all things through Jesus Christ. Incidentally, the Big Bang Theory makes sense of that. Because if Christ, the story of the Gospels, is the story of the creation of the world, guess what? A universe that meanders about, takes time, a lot of time to get where it's going, makes a lot more sense, for instance, with Jesus than it does with Allah. Muslims are going to have a much harder time in the long run with science than Christians are. Christians are the ones who created science. It is because William of Ockham said, God's humble, and God's not going to force himself on the universe. Therefore, the simplest explanation is usually the correct one. William of Ockham, who is a monk, is the reason why we have the Big Bang Theory. Mm-hmm. It's because of Christian understanding of the character of God that we have any science at all. And the Big Bang Theory is just the working out of that fact. And so the Big Bang Theory, to me, makes a lot more sense for a Christian than it does, for instance, for both. In Hindus have their own problem. Hindus and Buddhism have a problem because they see the universe as cyclical. Yeah. And there really isn't any sign that the universe is an endless cycle. The universe actually does have a linear part to it. The Big Bang is linear. It's growth. It's complexification. It's evolution. That makes more sense for a God that kind of creates the universe in a narrative pattern than it does. So other religions, I think, have a bigger problem. Even Judaism has a bigger problem than Christianity does, because if Jesus Christ is what God is like, if Jesus Christ reveals God, that kind of God makes a lot more sense in an evolutionary universe than in a universe that was made all at once. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So, Big Bang, if somebody comes up and asks you, do you believe in the Big Bang? There's no way to really sidestep it. You can say, I don't want to talk about that. That's fine. There's no reason, no way to there's no complexity here. Either you believe in the Big Bang or you don't. I do. You from what you're saying, you do. Do you, Jared?
Yeah.
You a Big Bang guy? Yeah. So everybody here believes in the Big Bang and evolution, and so does Kendall. And that's just the way it is.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have no shame of it. I think it's more Christocentric to believe in it. I think that it's more if anything, it speaks to the glory of God. I think that incidentally, and I wouldn't say this to Nate's face, you have a much bigger problem with Genesis than the Big Bang, because Genesis says we live inside a giant fishbowl, that there's water throughout the whole universe.
Yeah.
That's nutty at this point. We know we've been up there. We've been to freaking space. Mike Foles been up there. You can ask him if there's water up there. We're pretty much.
Mike Foles an astronaut? Or I know he works for them.
He was an astronaut. He was the first. He was just on a game show the other day.
You were on a game show?
Yeah, no, he was a question on a game show.
Oh, okay.
Who was the first? Mike Foles is known as the first British citizen to do what? A, walk in space. B, use a telegraph. That's what they picked, and I forget what C was.
He's the first one to go.
British?
He's the first British citizen to walk in space.
Yeah, I just
bad.
vaguely met him. Like I never talked with him before, but I know his English accent, and I'm thinking, is he kind of a celebrity back in England?
He is. They've met presidents, several presidents, and the Queen.
the full family has met. Why do they not tell us this stuff?
They do.
Jenna, they do it all the time. Jenna. I mean, they talk about it all the time. I mean, they don't talk. They're not. They're very. They're
It's so
humble
normal to them,
people,
probably. It's just-
but they're also humble people.
Yeah.
They don't go around. I
Yeah.
mean, I was pretty cool when I saw the video clip they put on. It got kind of viral on Facebook from everybody who knows him. I thought it was pretty cool. I was like, I know him. He was a question on a British game show.
Yeah.
That's pretty awesome. But like
Facebook.
Jenna used to get calls from the space station. He's spent, I think, he's spent maybe over a year in space. I mean, if you calculate all this stuff, she used to get calls in youth group from the space station because he'd have to call whenever he was in the right orbit. She would just get call right from the space station. So yeah.
Sweet.
If God is your number one, does that mean you love your spouse, kids, and parents less? I hope I get this question, or I hope
Well, if you're
the
You've
answer.
talked to me about this a lot before.
Yeah, the answer to that question is no. I don't love my kid. I love them less than God.
Yeah.
I love God the most, but loving God the most is what allows me to love my wife in the way I'm supposed to love my wife. Because the reason relationships often fail in this world today is people turn to other people for stuff they can't give them. They want them to fill a hole in their heart they're not capable of filling. And you cannot love a person. I do not believe you can love a person properly unless God is first in your life. And your love becomes poisonous. So it doesn't necessarily, The person can be the right person at the right time and all the time, and sometimes it works out. But you have got to have you cannot just try to pull from something people can't give you. Loving God first is what allows me to love everyone else as much as I love them. And God becomes a well. The more I love God, the more love God puts into me, which is more love I'm able to give to other people. Whereas other people can't give you that. They can't. It's not because they're bad. They can't. They're human. They're finite. You cannot seek from the finite which you can only gain from the infinite. And so that's my answer to that. Doesn't mean I love my spouse less. I would love my spouse I would love Angelique less if God didn't exist. Why? Because how much risk can you take with a person? I can't give everything to Angelique and think that she can die. That she can just obliterate into nothingness. To love the world, I say this before, to love the world so much that the destruction of any part of it should destroy you. But to be able to trust that you will not be destroyed. That's what faith is. That's the point of God. God allows me to love you without end, without limit. Because I can put everything to you, and if you leave this world, it doesn't destroy me. Because A, I believe you're vouchsafed in the life of God, and B, the person I need most in my life is not gone. Because that's God, not you. So I can love you without limit in a way that I could not if God was not first in my life. What?
economics. Producing capital goods does not prevent your ability to produce consumer goods. In the long run, it increases it.
Right. It's the same thing. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
He's a character.
Can I just wait until I'm old and on my deathbed to accept Christ? Huh?
So goodness.
That reminds me.
The answer to that is we're here to invite you into a relationship with Jesus Christ, and this is our goal.
Yeah.
I want to invite you into a relationship with Jesus Christ so that you can live a fully lived human life. Now, maybe on accepting Christ on your deathbed vouchsafes you for heaven and gives you confidence of heaven in the last moments of your life. Good for you, but you missed out on the best part.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like you can say, no, it doesn't work that way, because it's possible. I mean, you could do that, but...
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I believe God might do that for everybody. It may be that God takes them and right before we go towards the light and goes, hey, you want me now? Come on.
It reminds me of this movie, this independent Christian film, God's Not Dead.
Yeah.
And you know what it is. The premise is this philosophy teacher's having all the students sign a thing saying God is dead, and one student refuses to, and he comes around as an atheist, but he gets hit by a car near the end, and the two priests manage to find him, and he wants to resolve things. He was planning to resolve things with his girlfriend and wanted thinking of entering the life of Christ, and they say, we're here for you, and God still wants you, and it's like, he is a born-again Christian, and then he dies. And it seemed pointless, because what was the point of a story of a man who didn't believe in God because his mother died when he was a child, lived his life as a very bitter atheist, and then only for him to die and believe in Christ in the end? That's not a great story in the first place, and that doesn't show a way to enter into a life with Christ if you just die. It just seemed like anticlimactic, meaningless, and what it could have done for him.
And all of that, I mean, yes, you can't say it, but here's the deal. My goal, this is the great thing about our purpose. When we came here, what did we tell our purpose was? To invite you into a relationship with Jesus Christ so you can live a fully lived human life. Can you do that by accepting Christ on your deathbed? No. You may be able to gain the assurance of heaven in your heart. And that's a good thing and great, but that's not what we're here for anyways. Can you live a fully lived human life by accepting Jesus Christ on your deathbed? No, you can't, because you're dead. Mm-hmm. You can for 5 minutes. Don't you want it now?
Hello?
The next question is one I get all the time at the Galloway. Who created God? No one.
No.
God has always existed.
Mm-hmm.
He always will exist. He always shall exist. God, no one created. The next one I get all the time at Galloway. Who created God? No one created God. In a sense, you can say God creates himself, because Jesus is eternally begotten of the Father. So there is a sense in which God is always creating within God's self.
This is a concept, but we always say like biblical figures are like forces of nature, and God is a force of nature. So we could argue in a way God created himself because he is a force of nature. Life decided to play out, and he came to exist. So the universe.
There are questions about which the origin of something makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And there's questions about the origin of which the question does not make sense. In other words, where does that come from? If I ask where that chair comes from, who created that chair? That's a question that makes sense. Who created Jared? That question makes sense. Here's a question that doesn't make sense. Who created the number 2? Nobody. 2 is a mathematical concept. It's eternal. It's always going to be true that this plus this equals this. That even if there's nothing here, theoretical objects would still be this plus this equals this. Plato talks about it. That's what Plato was talking about. It makes no sense to ask who created the number 2. 2 is a fact. Mm-hmm. It's a question with no answer. It doesn't make sense. Who created God is, huh?
You're saying the concept of 2 isn't like something you can say who created it.
Right, we don't create math, we discover math. Math is something we discover.
I mean, obviously someone made up like the name 2.
Right, the name, but not the concept of 2.
Okay.
This plus this equals this is true, even if there's nothing here.
Mm-hmm.
Even if there's no one to know it. It's still true that this plus this equals this. It's just a fact. It's that's what Plato was talking about. Platonic forms, eternal abstract objects. So there's some questions that make sense about creation. And there's scientists, for instance, who think who created the universe doesn't make any sense. They think that the laws of the universe have always been here, and they're just law. So this is that the laws just exist. No one created them. The laws of nature just exist, and the universe came from those laws. So there's just those laws just exist. They just are. And so for a scientist, asking the question where the laws came from, they don't think that question makes sense. Incidentally, I do. I do think the question of where the laws of nature come from makes sense. That's the argument between atheists and religionists really supervenes on that question. Which makes sense? The question of where did God come from, or the question of where did the laws of physics come from? That's really the... So, everybody has things that they think that makes sense. For God, for a Christian, that question doesn't make any sense. It's just it doesn't have any answer. It's like asking what's north of the North Pole. Well, nothing. Because that's as north as you get. Who created God? Well, nobody created God, because God just is a fact. And reality supervenes on that fact. Whatever is because of the way God is. Asking why God is that way doesn't make any sense. God just is that way. What denomination are you, and what does that mean? Why aren't you a different one? Of course, everyone here is Episcopalian. Not you, sorry. Everyone at this church everybody who's a member of the church.
You were trained Pentecostal.
I was trained Pentecostal, that's right.
Yeah.
I'm going to just present myself as an Episcopalian, because explaining people a Pentecostal that works for the Episcopal Church, it's just too complicated, so I'm just going to be...
That's how I got there.
I'm there as an Episcopalian. I'm Episcopalian when it suits me. Anyways, that's weird. The thing about the Episcopal Church, I think, that makes it cool is, first of all, probably you were born into it. Mm-hmm. So, and the reason, I don't know what your opinions on or switching denominations or anything else. My argument for the Episcopal Church at its best takes all these different traditions, the Roman Catholic, the Protestant, and holds them in tension with each other, and creates what may be the closest that we ever get to what the original church is like. At its worst, it paralyzes the church, and the church becomes useless, and that's a problem with the Episcopal. Every denomination has pluses and minuses. I would emphasize that. Every denomination, every sect has pluses and minuses. Snake handlers, the minuses are more obvious. Episcopalians, the problems are we can become the frozen chosen. We can be paralyzed. Anglicanism can be paralyzed by its various traditions. But at its best, those traditions are held in tension, and you get poetry in motion. It is a church that teaches grace, and grace as something which God imparts to those who join together in His name. And if I was going to tell someone why to be an Episcopalian, that would be why. The prayer book is the Bible turned into worship. It's beautiful. It's powerful. And it has a lot of history. So.
For me, what I like is what they call the three legs of the Episcopal Church. Faith, logic, and tradition. And to me, those are all the things you could possibly need in a church. And it varies from person to person what they like. But in the end, I feel like it's a great way to meet a place where you can believe and have a relationship with God. But you need logic, and you need room for it. And when we were talking about Big Bang Theory, dinosaurs, I remember my cousin, he might have been 12 at the time, he remembered asking me the question, like, where did the dinosaurs fit into the story of the Bible? Because he's raised Lutheran, his parents are conservative, I don't know what their stance is on Big Bang Theory, but the fact he's asking this question made me wonder, what are they teaching him? Because he's genuinely curious, and he has an open mind, and he wants to know, how do dinosaurs fit into the scheme of creation?
Right.
And I feel like if that's the way his Lutheran church is structured, he definitely is going to be asking a lot of questions as he gets older.
In the Three Legs is another there's a thing by Robin Williams, The Top 10 Reasons to Be an Episcopalian. I also highly recommend that for you. You have a different history, so you have a different. You're gonna have a different argument.
Did you say Robin or Robert?
Robin Williams. We'll go over real quick before I leave.
Yes.
Women submitting to husbands. All the places where it talks about women submitting to Huh?
Ephesians 5.
It also talks about men loving their wives.
Mm-hmm.
And love is also submission.
Mm-hmm.
To love is to give freedom, to serve. And so when you put that quote in the other one, that's just a description of what love is about.
Yeah, whenever people read, most commonly when I think of is Ephesians 5, and they read it, and the first verse is that the wives submit to their husbands, and then they stop there and just get angry.
Right.
You just have to read, a couple more verses.
This is exactly
Yeah,
what you should tell people.
That happened, I don't know, about a month ago in youth group. That passage was